In this video, we're going to be examining the way GDP is calculated, and that will also teach us about the problems that statisticians encounter in measuring GDP and also in the way GDP numbers should be interpreted. Let me start by describing a very simple economy to you. In this economy, only beer and pizza is produced, and we're looking at 4 consecutive years. In 2013, we have 20 cans of beer, 30 slices of pizza, and the price of each item is $2, whether it's beer or pizza. So if you calculate GDP of this economy based on the definitions of GDP we've had before, it's going to be $100. $2 times 20 cans of beer, $2 times 30 slices of pizza, that's $100. In 2014, quantities remain the same, but we have a little bit of inflation in this economy. Let's say beer prices go up by 30 cents, so the price becomes $2.30, and the price of pizza goes up to $2.10. If we measure the GDP of this economy the way we've defined it during the period of 2014, it adds up to 109. If you look at the GDP of 2014, which adds up to 109, it looks like 9% growth from 2013. But if you notice here that the quantities haven't changed, the real income that people in this economy are enjoying hasn't really changed. So the GDP that we've calculated seems to be saying that these people are much better off, while in fact they're not. The problem is that we have included inflation in the GDP calculation because we've used current prices in 2014, and those prices happen to be higher. We need to come up with a way to calculate the GDP of this economy in 2014 in ways that are much more comparable with the situation in 2013. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. For now, let me describe the next 2 years, what happens in this economy. Notice that the price of beer has gone up faster than the price of pizza in 2014, and let's say that that process continues in 2015. This may have happened because the preferences for beer have increased and more people are interested in buying beers and less in pizza, and therefore producers respond to this to end up producing more beer and less pizza. So if we measure the GDP of this economy in current prices, we get $121.30, which is again higher than the previous years, but that's partly because of inflation. If we want to compare GDP and well-being of people in 2015 compared to the previous years, it becomes complicated because there's more beer and less pizza, and the question becomes, are these people better off or not? Again, we're going to come back to the ways of measuring GDP in comparable ways, but for now, let me describe what happens in 2016. Prices stabilize, but quantities continue to change. There's going to be more beer in this economy and less pizza, and eventually GDP adds up to $127.50. The measure of GDP that we have in the bottom row in this table is called nominal GDP. It's the GDP measured in current prices. It says something about that year, but it's not comparable over years. In order to measure GDP in ways that is comparable over the years, we need to come up with a definition and a way of measuring GDP. What we're really interested in is how much people are better off this year compared to some other year. To achieve this, we first start with the definition of real GDP. The definition of real GDP is the value that people attach to the goods and services produced in a given year compared to the goods and services produced in another year. That's the definition. How are we going to be measuring this? One simple way of measuring real GDP is to choose a set of base prices, choose a year, and use the prices of that year for all other years. Get rid of the inflation effect. This measure is called constant price GDP and is commonly used to control for inflation and come up with an estimate of real GDP. It's not a perfect measure of real GDP. As we will see later on, that it has problems, but it's an indicator. It's an approximate measure of real GDP. Let me show you how this works by going back to the example I presented earlier. So we choose a base year, let's say 2013, and we choose the prices in that year and measure GDP in those base prices for all years, not just for the base year. For the base year, there's no change in GDP from nominal GDP. It's the same because you're using the same prices. But for 2014 now, rather than using $2.30, $2.10 for beer and pizza units, we use the $2 value of those units for 2014 as well as 2013. The number we get now is $100 for 2014, which is exactly equal to the number for 2013, and that reflects the fact that quantities had not changed. When it comes to 2015, we use again the same prices, 2 and 2, and we get a measure of GDP of 106. This shows that if prices had not changed and people had attached the same values to beer and pizza that they used to attach in 2013, then the value of goods and services produced in this economy would have been $106, which is 6% higher than the previous years. So there's more value produced in this economy based on these measures, on these indicators of the values of the two products. The reason we get 6% increase, notice, is that we're cutting back 2 units from pizza, that's $4 loss, and we're adding 5 more units of beer, which each one valued at $2, that's $10 gain. So $10 gain, $4 loss, net gain of $6. The economy is producing more of one product and less of the other product, and because that transformation has allowed production system to produce more, to generate more value for the consumer, GDP has gone up. One final step, we calculate real GDP or constant price GDP of this economy in 2016, and again apply the base prices, and we get 110, which shows 10% increase over 2013 or 2014, but less from 2015. In fact, we can calculate GDP growth rate between different years. Then we get 0% for 2014, 6% for 2015, and 3.8% for 2016. Constant price GDP is an indicator of real GDP. But real GDP and constant price GDP should not be confused with each other. Real GDP is a concept. Constant price GDP is a measure. Constant price GDP is one way of measuring approximately what the real GDP is. But it's not a perfect one, and in fact, in some ways, it could be problematic. Using the constant price method, we run into a problem that we may have chosen the wrong base year. The results are very sensitive to which base year you choose, because the base year determines the relative prices, and if something is valued highly in that year, then any change in the quantity of that product is going to be very important in the GDPs of other years. If some product in a year happens to have low price, it's going to get lower weight and is going to have less impact on GDP, even if it grows fast in other years. Another problem with constant price GDP is that new products are constantly introduced into the economy, or qualities of products change, and constant price GDP has difficulty coping with those changes. Overall, the contribution of products that experience a rise in demand tend to be underestimated, and products that have declining demand is going to experience lowered prices, and that decline is going to be overestimated. There's of course another possibility that some goods experience decline in prices because their production becomes cheaper and people gain more access to them, as it has happened to the computers or cell phones, And again, there's going to be difficulty measuring the true value of goods and services using constant price GDP. Here's an example of consequences of using constant price GDP and using old weights to continue weighting products and production in an economy. In Nigeria, they had done a survey of industries and products in 1990 and used the results to put weights on products over the years until mid-2010s. Because a lot of new products had been introduced into the economy, especially IT services, and those things were non-existent in 1990, there was not much weight on those products in the GDP calculations. As a result, by 2013, the economy was producing a lot more goods and services that were not included in GDP calculation or received very low weight. And the consequence was that Nigeria's economy looked much smaller than it actually was. In fact, if you compare the GDP of Nigeria in 2013 with South Africa, it looked like Nigeria is a smaller economy than South African economy. But the government of Nigeria eventually revised the weights, and by the new weights, they discovered that the size of the economy is far larger. In fact, it became #1 economy by this measure in the African continent, by far bigger than the second one, the South African one. And in fact, it almost doubled in size. And this shows that using constant price GDP could generate very misleading measures of production activity in a country. So we have to come up with another measure that is much more accurate, is much updated much more commonly. We're going to do this in the next video.